Past midnight. Seattle rain. A knock at the door. Clinton opened it and went still. Serena Torres, his ex-wife's little sister. 5 years of silence between them. She was soaking wet, and in her hand was a marriage form already filled out with his name. Sign this by Friday, or they take everything I built. 3 years of quiet had a particular sound in Clinton Carter's apartment. It was the sound of a cartoon playing in the next room while he cooked dinner. The sound of Jaden's sneakers squeaking down the hallway when the boy came running because he smelled something good. It was the sound of two people figuring out how to be a family with half the pieces missing and somehow making it work anyway. Clinton was 34, a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm downtown, and he had built his life after the divorce the same way he approached any damaged structure, carefully without rushing, fixing what could be fixed and accepting what couldn't. Diana had left 3 years ago, not out of hatred, not out of betrayal, but out of the slow, quiet kind of growing apart that nobody warns you about. She had taken a position in Los Angeles. They had agreed civilly that Jaden would stay in Seattle with Clinton. She called on Sundays. Jaden always answered. It was a life that worked. Not beautiful, not full of momentum, but stable. And after everything, stable felt like more than enough. Jaden was 8 years old and had his father's build and his mother's restlessness. He couldn't sit still for more than 20 minutes unless he had a sketchbook in front of him. The apartment walls had 3 of his drawings taped up: a dragon, a spaceship, and something that was supposed to be a wolf but looked more like a large dog having a bad day. Clinton had told him it was great. He meant it. That night before the knocking started, Clinton had been sitting at the kitchen table going through a set of structural reports he hadn't finished at the office. Jaden was already asleep. The apartment was the way Clinton liked it, after 9, still warm, undisturbed. Then the knocking came. Hard, urgent. The kind of knocking that didn't wait for an answer before starting again. He opened the door, and whatever he expected, a neighbor with an emergency, someone with the wrong apartment, it wasn't this. Serena Torres was standing in the hallway, soaked from the Seattle rain, her dark hair flattened against her face. She was holding a folded paper in one hand, and even through the water damage, Clinton could see it was an official form. He could see his own name typed into one of the fields. He hadn't seen her in 5 years. The last time was at some family gathering that happened before the marriage started falling apart, back when Serena was 22, and loud about everything, the kind of person who had an opinion on every subject and wasn't shy about sharing it. He remembered her as someone with paint on her hands at a dinner table talking about art like it was the only thing that mattered. The woman in the doorway didn't look like that right now. She looked like someone who had been holding it together for a very long time and was running low. Clinton stepped back to let her in. She walked past him into the apartment, and he got her a towel without being asked. She pressed it against her face and hair, not speaking yet, and he stood near the kitchen counter and waited. He'd learned a long time ago that there was a kind of silence that needed to be used up before real conversation could start. When Serena finally put the towel down, she looked at the form in her hand, then at him. "I know this is insane," she said. "I know exactly how this looks." Clinton crossed his arms. "Then explain it to me." So she did. Her name was on the incorporation documents of a community arts center called The Root, a space she had spent 4 years building in one of Seattle's lower-income neighborhoods, a place that ran free classes in music painting and basic life skills for teenagers who didn't have anywhere else to go after school. She had started it with a small grant and a borrowed storefront. She had grown it into something real. The problem was a man named Garrett Hale. Hale had been an early donor, significant money in the first year, the kind of financial support that let the Root become what it became. But Hale hadn't donated out of generosity. He donated for leverage. Now he was filing a civil suit arguing that Serena was unfit to manage a non-profit organization. His legal team had spent months building a case around her personal history, the years she'd spent moving between cities, a public argument with her family that made it into a local blog, a semester of college she hadn't finished. "My lawyer said the same thing 3 times, Serena said. "In cases like this, the judge doesn't just look at the numbers. They look at the person. And right now, everything about my history on paper makes me look unstable. Clinton said nothing, so she kept going. She needed to demonstrate for the duration of the legal process that she had a stable personal life, a partner, someone credible standing beside her. Her lawyer had identified Friday night as the deadline for the initial court filing. If Clinton's name wasn't on the marriage registration before that window closed, they would lose the strongest piece of personal evidence before the case even began. "Why me?" Clinton asked. The question was flat, not hostile. "Because I don't have anyone else I trust enough," she said. "And because you already know the worst parts of my family. There's nothing to explain." The logic was thin, and they both knew it. What she wasn't saying directly, what sat in the air between them, was that Clinton was also the ex-husband of her sister, which made this either the most reasonable option she had or the most complicated one. Clinton looked at the form on his kitchen table. His name was already typed into the groom's field. Clean official waiting. "How long?" he asked. "Until the verdict. 2 months, maybe 3. "And Diana knows about this." Serena met his eyes. "I talked to her. She doesn't like it. But she's not going to fight it." She let that sit for a moment, then added, "She knows what the root means. Even she knows what losing it would cost." Clinton walked to the window. Outside, the rain was still coming down hard, streaking the glass, blurring the city lights into long smears of yellow and white. He thought about all the ways this could go wrong for him, for his job, for the uncomplicated life he had worked carefully to build. Then he thought about something else. He thought about Jaden, who 3 weeks ago had taped a new drawing to the wall. Not a dragon, not a spaceship, but a picture of a man standing in front of a building, handing something to a group of kids. Clinton had asked him where he got the idea. "I don't know," Jaden had said. "I just wanted to draw someone doing something good." He thought about what it meant to have a place where a kid like Jaden, curious, creative, looking for something to aim at, could walk in and be taken seriously. He thought about what it meant to lose that place because one man with money decided it was more valuable as something else. Clinton turned back from the window. He picked up the pen from beside the stack of structural reports he'd been reviewing when the night was still ordinary. He looked at Serena. Once she wasn't pleading, wasn't crying, just watching him with the particular stillness of someone who had already accepted the possibility of no. He signed the form. Serena exhaled slowly. She looked down at the signature, then back up at him, and for a second, the professional composure she'd been holding all evening shifted just slightly, not into gratitude exactly, but into something more honest than that. Relief mixed with the specific weight of knowing you've just pulled someone else into your problem. "I'll make this as clean as possible," she said. "You won't regret it." Clinton capped the pen. "I already might," he said. "But that's not the same thing as wrong." He handed her the form back. She folded it carefully, slid it into her bag. He gave her a dry change of clothes, a sweatshirt, a pair of sweatpants that were too long, and she changed in the bathroom while he made coffee. Neither of them really needed, but both of them drank anyway. They sat at the kitchen table for another hour, going over the basic facts they'd need to have ready, how they'd reconnected, when, what their story looked like from the outside. Clinton was methodical about it, the same way he was methodical about everything, taking notes, asking precise questions, not letting the strangeness of the situation become an excuse for being sloppy. When Serena finally left just after 2 in the morning, Clinton stood in the doorway and watched the elevator close behind her. He stood there for a moment longer, alone in the hallway, listening to the building settle around him. Down the hall behind a closed door, his son was sleeping without any idea that by morning, his father would be a married man. The story they built was simple, because simple stories are harder to pull apart. They had reconnected at a mutual friends gathering 6 months ago. They had kept it quiet because of the obvious complications Clinton's history with Diana. The family dynamics, the fact that neither of them was the type to broadcast a relationship before they were sure of it. They had decided to get married quickly because the legal situation required it, and because when you know, you know. That last part was the hardest for Clinton to say with a straight face. Serena had looked at him across the kitchen table when they rehearsed it and said flatly that he needed to sound more convinced. He had told her that he was a structural engineer, not an actor. She had told him those two things weren't mutually exclusive. They practiced twice more after that, and by the third run-through, Clinton had found a version of the line that didn't make him feel like he was lying. He just focused on what was actually true, which was that he had made the decision and he wasn't backing out of it. The feeling behind the words was real, even if the timeline wasn't. The harder problem turned out to be Jaden, not because the boy was difficult about it. The opposite, actually. When Clinton sat down with Jaden the morning after Serena's visit and explained carefully that a woman named Serena was going to be spending some time around them, that she and Clinton were together. Now Jaden had asked two questions. First, was she nice? Second, could she cook? Clinton said yes to both without being entirely sure about the second one. When Serena came over that Saturday afternoon, Jaden was at the kitchen table with his sketchbook, working on something he wouldn't show anyone. Serena came in, set her bag down, and didn't make a big production of introducing herself. She sat across from Jaden and asked what he was drawing. Jaden, who was generally suspicious of adults who tried too hard, looked up at her with the flat assessment that only an 8-year-old can fully commit to. "A city," he said, "but from above, like a bird." Serena leaned forward to look at the angle of the page. "You've got the grid right," she said. "A lot of people forget that real cities aren't perfectly square. They bend around water and hills." Jaden looked at her with different eyes after that. By the end of that afternoon, they were sitting side by side at the table, Jaden showing her his dragon drawing and Serena pointing out what the proportions would look like if the wings actually had to carry that body weight. It was not the kind of conversation Clinton had expected. He stood in the kitchen doorway watching it and felt something shift inside him, something quiet and not entirely comfortable, because he hadn't planned for Serena to fit into this apartment like she belonged there. Over the following weeks, the rehearsals became less like rehearsals. They fell into a rhythm that was easier than it had any right to be, Serena joining them for dinner 2 or 3 times a week, the three of them landing on a routine the way furniture lands in the right spot after you've moved it twice. Clinton noticed things about her he hadn't had the chance to notice before. The way she organized chaos efficiently, always knowing which problem to address first. The fact that she read structural criticism of buildings the way most people read novels, carrying marked-up paperbacks in her bag with titles like The Death and Life of Great American Cities. The way she talked to Jaden directly without adjusting her vocabulary down, as if she understood that kids don't need to be spoken to like kids, they just need to be spoken to honestly. She was not the person he remembered from those family dinners years ago. Or maybe she was, and he'd never looked closely enough. The first hearing was on a Tuesday morning in late October. Garrett Hale's legal team had done their preparation well. The lead attorney, a man named Douglas Farrell, was the kind of lawyer who understood that courtrooms ran on narrative as much as evidence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Farrell walked the judge through a timeline. Serena Torres and Clinton Carter, he let the name land, had not had any documented contact for over 5 years. The marriage registration had been filed less than 3 weeks after Serena's legal team had advised her that personal stability would be a significant factor in the judge's assessment. The speed of the marriage, Farrell suggested, was not the result of love or conviction. It was the result of strategy. Then he turned and looked at Clinton. "Mr. Carter, if this marriage is genuine, can you tell the court when you and Ms. Torres first decided to pursue a relationship, Clinton had been prepared for questions?" He and Serena had rehearsed responses. He knew the timeline they'd built, the details they'd agreed on, the story that was supposed to hold. He looked at Douglas Farrell. He looked at the judge. Then he looked at Serena, who was sitting very still, her hands flat on the table in front of her. Something in him made a decision that his mouth carried out before his brain finished approving it. "I can tell you that," he said. "But I think the more relevant question is why I married her. And the answer to that is simpler." Farrell's expression didn't change. "Mr. Carter, I married her because I've watched what she's built," Clinton said, "and because nobody else was standing next to her while she built it. I can't speak to what your client's motives are for wanting to take the root away from the community it serves, but I can tell you that my reason for being here is that I believe in what Serena is doing, and I believe in her ability to keep doing it." The room was quiet for a moment. Farrell shifted his approach, but the momentum of his argument had changed shape. The hearing ended without a ruling. The judge indicated she would consider preliminary motions before scheduling the full proceeding. Outside the courthouse, walking to the car, Serena didn't say anything for nearly half a block. When she finally spoke, she kept her eyes forward. "That wasn't what we practiced." "No," Clinton said. "It was better," she said, and that was all she said about it. The weeks between the first hearing and the next filing deadline had a different quality than the weeks before. The pressure was still there. Farrell's team was clearly preparing something heavier for the main proceeding, but without an immediate deadline, there was room for other things. Clinton found himself thinking about the root more than he'd expected. Serena talked about it the way some people talked about their children, with a combination of exhaustion and complete dedication that made it clear the thing had become inseparable from her sense of herself. One afternoon, he asked if he could see it. Serena looked at him sideways. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. She took him on a Thursday evening. The root occupied the ground floor of a converted building on the south side, high ceilings, big windows that let the autumn light come in sideways walls, covered floor to ceiling with artwork made by the students who came through. There was a music room in the back, where someone was playing a keyboard badly and enthusiastically. There was a painting class in progress, in the main space teenagers standing at easels, while a young woman with natural hair walked between them offering adjustments. Clinton stood in the entrance for a moment and took it in. A man in his 50s was waiting near the front, and when Serena walked in, he crossed the room and shook her hand with both of his. He introduced himself as Raymond. His son, he explained, had come to the root 2 years ago after dropping out of high school. He was now enrolled in a community college design program. Raymond had been wanting to say thank you in person for months. Clinton watched Serena receive that. She didn't deflect it or make it small. She asked Raymond his son's name and listened when he answered. After Raymond left, Clinton walked through the rest of the building. Near the back, there was a section of wall where the plaster had been pulling away from the frame, a water damage issue, probably a slow leak somewhere in the exterior. He pressed his hand against it, gauged the spread, made a note in his phone. The following Saturday, he came back with tools. Serena found him in the back hallway an hour into the repair work. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him work. "You could have just told me it needed fixing," she said. Clinton didn't look up from the wall. "You would have put it on a list and gotten to it in 3 months. That's what lists are for. Lists are for things that can wait," he said. "This can't." She watched him work for a while longer, and then she went and got him a cup of coffee and left it on the floor beside his tool bag without being asked. That evening, after the repair was done and the building was emptying out, they sat on the front steps while the neighborhood settled into the sounds of early night. It was the first time they'd been still together without an agenda. No rehearsal, no preparation, no court date to plan around. Serena said out of nothing in particular, "I used to think I was doing all of this because I had something to prove." Clinton looked at her. "My family, not just Diana, all of them, they had this picture of who I was going to be, the difficult one, the one who couldn't finish anything." She looked out at the street. "For a long time, I thought the root was my argument against that picture." "And now?" Clinton asked. "Now I think it's just mine," she said. "I'm not arguing with anyone anymore. I just don't want to lose it." Clinton didn't say anything immediately. Then, Diana used to say you were the most certain person she'd ever met. She meant it as a criticism. I always thought she had it backwards. Serena looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. Then she turned back to the street. She told me you were the best man she'd ever known, Serena said. She also meant it as a criticism. Clinton made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was close to one. They sat there for a while longer, not filling the quiet, just letting it be what it was. The document arrived through Farrell's office 10 days before the main proceeding. It was an internal audit from 3 years prior, a financial review that the Root had conducted before Serena had fully formalized the organization's accounting structure. The audit had flagged irregularities, misallocated grant funds expenses that hadn't been properly categorized, a pattern that Farrell's cover letter described as a consistent disregard for fiduciary responsibility. Serena brought it to Clinton's apartment that evening. She put it on the kitchen table and stood back from it like it was something that might move. "It's real," she said. "The audit is real. The errors were real." Clinton read through the document. "What happened? I was running a growing organization with a spreadsheet and a volunteer accountant who moved away 6 months in," she said. "The money was never stolen. It was just tracked badly. I caught it, I fixed it, I hired a proper financial manager and restructured everything. But I never disclosed it publicly because by the time I fixed it, there was nothing wrong anymore, and I didn't want to shake people's confidence in the organization when it wasn't necessary." Clinton set the document down. "Farrell is going to say you hid it. I know. And the judge is going to have to decide whether the reason you didn't disclose it was because it was corrected or because you were protecting yourself." Serena sat down across from him. "My lawyer thinks the framing is going to be very hard to overcome. Hale's team has been building toward this for months. Everything else was just set up." She looked at her hands on the table. "I think we both know what this probably means." Clinton looked at her across the same table where they'd rehearsed their story weeks ago, back when this was just a transaction, back when he hadn't spent a Saturday afternoon fixing drywall in her building, or watched her listen to a father thank her for changing his son's life. "You said something to me," he said, "the night you came here. You said I knew what it felt like to have someone try to take away the most important thing you had." Serena looked up. "You were right," Clinton said. "I do know." He pulled the document toward him and read through it again more carefully this time. "And I know the difference between someone who made mistakes and someone who can't be trusted. This," he tapped the audit, "is not the same thing as what Farrell is going to say it is." Serena held his gaze. "Clinton, you have a son. You have a job, a life. If you stand up in that courtroom and this goes the wrong way, then it goes the wrong way," he said. "But I'm not leaving you to fight this alone." The kitchen was quiet around them. Outside, Seattle was doing what Seattle did in November, rain moving in slow and steady against the windows, the city going gray at the edges. Jaden was asleep in his room. The audit document sat on the table between them, 11 pages of numbers that someone had decided to use as a weapon. Clinton gathered the pages together, straightened them, and set them to one side. "Tell me everything," he said. "Every decision you made, every correction, every step from the problem to where you are now. All of it. Because when I walk into that courtroom, I need to know this story better than Farrell does." The main proceeding was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in December. Clinton dropped Jaden at school, drove across the city in the gray pre-dawn light, and sat in the courthouse parking garage for 10 minutes before going inside. He wasn't nervous exactly. It was something more specific than that. It was the feeling of knowing that what happened in the next few hours was going to matter in ways that extended past the legal outcome, past the Root, past Serena's name on a set of incorporation documents. He had stopped pretending otherwise somewhere around the 3rd week of this arrangement, sometime between fixing drywall and sitting on front steps in the November dark. Serena was already inside when he arrived, seated beside her attorney at the plaintiff's table. She had her hair pulled back, a dark blazer, the particular stillness she deployed when she was managing something internally. She looked up when Clinton came through the door, and something in her expression settled. Not relief, something quieter and more fundamental than that. He took the seat beside her. Douglas Farrell opened for Hale's team with the audit document. He was methodical about it. He walked the judge through the financial irregularities line by line, framing each one not as a mistake or an oversight, but as a pattern, a sustained failure of accountability that, in Farrell's telling, revealed something essential about Serena's character as a manager and a steward of public trust. He used the word concealment 4 times in the first 10 minutes. Serena's attorney countered on the technical points well. The corrections had been made. The organization's finances had been independently verified as clean for the past 2.5 years. The audit itself had been an internal process, not a legal requirement. Concealment implied intent, and intent had not been established. Farrell came back with the timeline, the speed of Serena and Clinton's marriage, the convenient proximity to the legal proceedings, the suggestion that the personal stability she was presenting to the court was constructed rather than real. The judge listened to all of it with the measured attention of someone who had heard many versions of many arguments and had learned not to react to any of them until she was ready. When both legal teams had finished their primary statements, the judge looked up from her notes. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you've been listed as a character witness for the respondent. Do you wish to address the court?" Clinton stood. He had no prepared remarks. He had thought about writing, some had actually started twice, and both times had stopped because written remarks would have required him to decide in advance what the truth was, and he had found over the past several weeks that the truth kept being larger than what he'd expected it to be when he started. So he spoke without notes. He told the judge about the evening he had first walked into the Root, not as a husband doing his due diligence, but as someone who had been told about a place and needed to see it for himself. He described what he'd seen, the paintings on the walls, the keyboard player in the back room who was bad at it and fully committed to it anyway. The painting class in progress with a young instructor who moved between students like she had all the time in the world for each of them. He told her about Raymond. He described the specificity of it, the way Raymond had crossed the room when Serena came in, the way he'd used both hands for the handshake, the way he'd said his son's name when Serena asked for it, like the name itself carried the weight of everything that had changed. Clinton told the judge that he had watched Serena receive that moment without deflecting it, without making it smaller or larger than it was. "She didn't say it was nothing," Clinton said. "She didn't make a speech about what the Root represents or what her vision is. She just asked his son's name and listened. I think that's actually who she is." Farrell interjected with a procedural objection about relevance. The judge acknowledged it and asked Clinton to bring his remarks to the evidence at hand. Clinton nodded. "The audit," he said. "I've read it. I'm an engineer. I read structural documents for a living, which means I've learned how to tell the difference between a building that was designed badly and a building that had a problem that got fixed. Those are not the same thing, and treating them as the same thing is how you end up tearing down structures that are worth saving." He looked at the judge directly. 3 years ago, the Root had accounting problems. They were real. Serena fixed them. She hired a financial manager, restructured the record-keeping, and has operated cleanly since. The reason she didn't issue a public disclosure at the time is not complicated. The problem was corrected before it caused harm, and she made a judgment call that announcing a resolved issue would shake the confidence of a community that had just started to trust something new. You can disagree with that call, but calling it concealment, framing it as evidence that she can't be trusted, requires you to ignore everything that came after it. And everything that came after it is a functioning organization that has been serving this neighborhood for 4 years. He let that land, then added one more thing. "My son is 8 years old. He likes to draw. A few weeks ago, he told me for the first time that he wants to be an artist when he grows up. He said it the afternoon after he'd spent time at the Root with Serena." Clinton kept his voice level. "I'm not asking the court to make a decision based on that. I'm just telling you what I've seen from where I'm standing. The Root is not Garrett Hale's investment. It belongs to the people who walk through its doors." He sat down. The room held its quiet for a moment. Farrell requested the opportunity to cross-examine. The judge said she had enough for preliminary consideration and asked both parties to remain available for her ruling, which she indicated would come within 48 hours given the time-sensitive nature of the nonprofit's operational schedule. The ruling came the following morning. The judge denied Hale's petition for management transfer. Her written decision noted that while the historical audit irregularities were a legitimate concern, the subsequent record of correction and clean operation weighed significantly against the inference of ongoing mismanagement. She further noted that the petitioner had not demonstrated concrete operational harm, only the theoretical possibility of future harm, which was insufficient grounds for removing a founder from a functioning organization. Garrett Hale could appeal. His attorney indicated he would consider it. But the immediate threat was over. Serena got the call from her lawyer at 3:15 that afternoon. She called Clinton 12 minutes later. He was in the school pickup line when his phone rang, parked at the curb in the long row of cars that assembled every day at 3 o'clock outside Jaden's school. He answered on the second ring. Serena's voice was steady, but it had a different quality than her usual steadiness, looser, like something that had been held tightly for months had finally been allowed to relax. "We won," she said. Clinton leaned back in the driver's seat and looked at the gray December sky through the windshield. "Good," he said. There was a beat on the line. "That's all you've got," Serena said. "I'm in a school parking lot," he said. "I'll be more expressive later." She laughed, a real one, unguarded in a way he hadn't heard from her before. They met that afternoon in front of the Root. The building looked the same as it always did, solid. A little weathered, the painted mural above the entrance slightly faded from the fall rain. Inside, someone was running a class. The keyboard player was back, still enthusiastic, still working on the same progression he'd been working on for weeks. They stood on the front steps, the December cold, sitting lightly around them. Legally, there was nothing holding them together anymore. The case was resolved. The marriage had served its purpose. Clinton could file the paperwork, return to his apartment, return to the uncomplicated version of his life that he had carefully constructed over 3 years of quiet work. He knew all of that. He stayed where he was. "The Root has a winter break program starting next month," Serena said, looking at the mural above the door. 3 weeks daily classes. I'm going to need someone to look at the heating system in the East Wing before then. It's been making a sound. Clinton looked at her. "What kind of sound?" "The kind that costs money." "I'll come look at it Saturday," he said. Serena turned toward him, and the expression on her face was the most uncomplicated thing he'd seen from her since the night she'd arrived soaking wet at his door with a marriage form in her hand. Not relief, not gratitude, just the particular look of a person who has stopped performing and is simply present. "Jaden can come," she said. "There's a Saturday class he might like." Clinton nodded once. 4 months later, on a Saturday in April, they got married again. No courthouse, no legal strategy, no carefully rehearsed story about how and when and why. Just a small gathering in the back garden of a friend's house, Serena's colleagues from the Root, a few of Clinton's friends from work, Raymond and his son who had driven down from the community college he was now attending 2 hours north. Jaden stood beside his father in a button-down shirt he'd complained about for 20 minutes before going quiet when he saw Serena come out. He was holding a rolled piece of paper in both hands, a drawing he'd made the night before, which he had refused to show anyone until that moment. He handed it to Serena when she reached them. She unrolled it carefully. It was the Root drawn from above, the way a bird would see it, the grid of the surrounding streets bending correctly around the geography of the neighborhood. In front of the building, 3 small figures stood together. She looked at Jaden. He looked back at her with the complete seriousness of an 8-year-old who has made something he believes in. "It's us," he said. Serena folded the drawing carefully and held it against her side for the rest of the afternoon. Some things begin as transactions and become something else entirely. Not because the circumstances force them to, but because the people involved slowly, imperfectly, without planning for it, choose to let them. That, in the end, is the only way anything real ever starts. And honestly, that's what gets me about this story. Clinton didn't sign that paper because he was in love. He signed it because he recognized something real that was worth protecting. And somewhere between fixing a wall he wasn't asked to fix and sitting on a front step in the dark with no agenda, he stopped just protecting it and started belonging to it. We've all had a moment like that, haven't we? Where you say yes to something complicated, something that doesn't make clean sense on paper, and it turns out to be the best decision you ever made. If this story hit something for you, drop a comment and tell me what part stayed with you the most. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this today, share it with them. That's the whole point of building something like this channel, one story at a time for the people who need it. I'll see you in the next one.